Hi, it's Diana from the Shrewsbury Public Library, and I'm here to teach you how to start those seeds you got. So, if you've picked up seeds from the Seed Lending Library, you're going to open up your envelope and you are going to have a bunch of tiny seed packs. Now you'll also might have some other seeds at home that you want to start. So the most important thing you need to look at is the back and see on the top it says the planting depth, the plant spacing, but most importantly, what you want to check out is how far in advance you need to start these seeds. It'll say right away, like for example, these peppers, it says start seeds indoors 8 to 12 weeks before the last frost. Meanwhile, other ones usually say about 4 weeks. Some say direct seed after frost, so unless you want to start them early so that the plants are a little bit bigger, you don't necessarily need to start everything in seed trays like this as well. Also, if you have any squashes or cucumbers, it says only start indoors 3 weeks before transplanting. Those we'll talk about a little bit later as well, and how you have to plant it in a much bigger container and don't disturb the roots or you kill your plants. So, what are some items that you need to have a successful seed starting adventure? So, what I'm going to show you is what I do at my house. I have a nice base tray so that you don't get any soil or water in your house, because they live in my dining room until they're quite happy and I move them downstairs to a light. You're going to need some seed starting trays. You can have it where they come in a great big thing. You can obviously break these apart. You can see they're different sizes. Just know that when you start them in small containers, they will have to get transplanted no matter what. And if you have fresh, brand new trays, you can use them right away. Now, for instance, at home, I have seed starting trays that I reuse every year. Now, what you need to do if you are reusing your seed starting material, you need to bleach your bottom tray. I have something like this, but it's one full flat. They don't break apart. That, and then your domes that we'll talk about later. You need to put those in a bleach solution, spray them, soak them in the bathtub, in a bleach solution for about 10 minutes to sterilize your equipment. Otherwise, the whole point of starting with your seed starting mix, it's sterile. If you put it into dirty containers, you do have the problem of running into all of those seed starting woes. So start with brand new material or just bleach it for 10 minutes, 10% bleach solution, and you'll be perfectly fine. It's also a nice way to reuse different containers. I know if you have a lot of yogurt cups or anything like that, again, just bleach those items for 10 minutes in a 10% bleach solution. So, what do you need? We need our seed starting tray. We need our containers. I'm going to only fill these 4 little guys in just to demonstrate. You need seed starting mix. Again, like I was saying, it's sterile. It is different from your regular potting mix. Now, if it's stuff that can be planted directly outside, those things can be started in potting soil if you want. If you're only planting a few things and you're planting, say, cosmos, which you could direct seed outside, you can go straight to potting mix in a larger container. However, for things such as peppers and tomatoes, things like that need to be started beforehand, the seed starting mix is exactly what you need. There's a lot of diseases and viruses that kill your seedlings, so it's really devastating. So you want to make sure you use seed starting mix. The different brands are all a little different. It's very light, it's very fluffy. Remember, your seeds are very small, so nice, light, fluffy soil is exactly what they need. All right, so I'm just going to demonstrate what you want your seed starting mix to look like. This is my favorite part, because you get dirty. Obviously, if you don't like touching soil and you don't really want to do this, you could use a spoon or whatever. So, I'm really trying to get in there on this. What you're looking for is your soil is nice and wet. You don't want it too wet though. The perfect optimum thing is that when you squeeze it, obviously you can see it's a little too wet, it's dripping. So what I would do is add a little bit more potting mix to make it perfect. But a quick thing, you want to be able to squeeze your soil and it hold its shape like a snowball. If you squeeze it and it just crumbles, you're going to have to add more water. If it, is dripping, you're going to have to add a little bit more potting mix so it's nice and fluffy. When you fill your seed trays, the main thing you want to do is keep that, you have this fluffy soil, you want to keep it fluffy. So make sure when you're mixing it, it's nice and light, you're not like cramming it down. In the same manner, when you're starting your seeds, you're going to, I call it the cheese grater method. I'm sure there's a better term, but I like it. You're going to have your clump of soil, and obviously this is a little wet. The nice thing is that it'll drain through, but you have to keep it nice and light. So I have my clump, and I literally grate it like a block of cheese. I'm not cramming it in. I'm keeping it nice and fluffy. If you have any of these like big sticks or anything like that, I tend to just stuff it in the corner just to fill in the space. Now, if you feel like you need to, you could tamp it very lightly. You see I wasn't slamming that. And you want to fill it to the top. And just make sure that you kind of clear those boundaries a little bit, just so that you actually know where your boundaries are. And then also too, some seeds, if they stay in the container for too long, they might jump over to the next cell. So if you want to avoid that, if you know you may not be able to be right on the spot with doing it, then I will just do one more. Just taking my clump of soil and gently just brushing it over the top. And the benefit to, so big sticks like this, you can remove. That's not going to be any help to any of your seeds. All right, so I have that filled. I'm going to go wash my hands. All right, so now you've filled your seed trays. The next important step you need is, I'm going to find those peppers again. So you find your seed packet and you're looking at the back. At the very top, if you have your seed lending library packet, it's going to say the planting depth. Now this is really important because if you plant seeds too deep, they're very tiny. They're not going to be able to break through the top very well, and you're going to be wondering where are your seedlings. And if you have them too high, then your seedlings won't stay moist enough, and then they'll die that way. So if you read that, you will be perfect. So these little peppers, it's saying planting depth 1/4 of an inch. So what you might want to do is literally take a ruler and just measure how far 1/4 of an inch is on your finger. Now when I work with little kids, I tend to tell them, about 1/2 inch is about to the top of your fingernail. Now obviously as an adult, you're going to have a larger finger. But I know that if I just, for 1/4 of an inch, if I just tickle in the top of the soil, I'm not making a huge hole, and if you notice, I'm not cramming my finger in, I'm just lightly brushing it to the side. That's going to be about 1/4 of an inch. Again, if you're not sure, what you could do is literally take a pencil and just, either on the eraser end, or if you have a brand new pencil that's not sharpened, and you just mark it on the pencil and you just make a hole that way, you kind of spin it in a little bit, then you would have absolute precision. That's up to you. And then what I'm just going to do is I'm literally going to put 1 seed per hole. Sometimes you could put 2 if you feel so inclined, and make sure that the holes are right there in the center. So I have my 6 pepper seeds, and then again, for covering, I'm not cramming it down because the whole point is that nice loose soil. I'm just brushing over the soil, just so, like that. Now the one thing about peppers is that they absolutely need light to germinate properly. Other thing you want to do is you want to label. You have to make sure you label what you've planted, because unless you know what seedlings your first leaves look like and you're able to differentiate, you're not going to know what you're planting. So I will write later, I forgot a pen here, but that's just going to be my peppers. All right, on the same thing, if you were starting, remember I was talking about those squash. Squash you can start in potting mix, you don't need seed starting mix. You're gonna want a very large container. Think like a nice larger yogurt cup, like those sort of the half size, but the really tall ones, just nice and wide. You're going to plant those in the middle. You can make a hill, 2 or 3 seeds in that. And then as it sprouts, you want it just so that the soil's warm enough so it'll sprout sooner and you won't have damp rot, which means the seeds literally rot in too wet of a ground. But when you are removing it, and I'll give an example on this, you want to brace the plant, and this is for any plant that you're transplanting. You're going to put your fingers to support around the stem, and then you're going to tip it over, and you'll squeeze the container, and you're able to tip it out like that. For cucumbers and squashes, zucchinis, pumpkins, anything like that, those nice thick those thick roots, don't mess the soil. Don't disturb the roots, because those will kill the plants. And you're just gonna make a hole in the ground and literally dump that whole thing in. Now, for things like tomatoes and basils and things like that, you can, especially tomatoes. Tomatoes you can beat up and they'll still live. If you do find your other plants do happen to get root bound, and you'll notice there'll be all these little white lines all really stuck in if they didn't get transplanted to a larger container soon enough, poke up from the bottom and just tease them apart, and they'll be perfectly fine, and they'll be grateful to have more space for their roots to grow. Okay, so say you've got your entire tray filled with soil, planted, labeled. The next thing you need is a dome cover. So I like to start with the nice low dome so that it keeps the humidity in. Now this is making a perfect greenhouse. If you had the right amount of water in your container when you started when you wet your seed mix, you don't need to water these at all. Okay, you don't want to be overwatering because there's nothing growing, nothing is using the water. It has the right amount of soil. If you feel like your soil might be a little too dry, what folks like to do is just lay them in a small dish of water so that it soaks from the bottom up. Now that's important because you made sure you planted those seeds at the proper depth. If you water from the top, you've now shifted where those seeds are in the depth. So if you do need to water, place them, into a container of water, allow them to soak up, and then put it back in. So you're going to place this in a sunny window or under a grow light, and you're going to let them do their thing. Now the very other important thing, especially if you are growing peppers, pretty much anything likes a little extra heat unless it's cabbages. They like to grow outside and when it's cool. I have what's called a heat mat. Now, if you've ever struggled with growing peppers, probably didn't have this. So what it is, it's literally an electric blanket for plants. So what you're gonna wanna do is put it underneath your tray, and then you plug it in. So you do need to make sure that, where you are having your seed tray, that you are close enough to an outlet, or if you have an extension cord, anything like that. If you are putting it on the ground, you may want to have like a little towel or just a little barrier just in case. I have ruined my floor by putting it directly on, so now I have a little bit of a towel just so the heat isn't directly right on it. The other trick that you may want to do, that I found works very successfully for me, is those items who need to remain the hottest. Think those summer plants. So in particular, my peppers and my tomatoes, I'm going to have in the center of the tray because it's going to keep the heat the most. Along the edges, just imagine, it's kind of closer to the elements of your house, so that it might, especially where I am, the door opening and closing, it might fluctuate a little bit more. So those peppers are going to stay right in the center. And then things that could go a little bit cooler, like say I'm starting some lettuces, just so that they start and then I can transplant really quickly outside. I'm going to have them closer to the edge, or maybe some of my basils and things like that. But the hotter I want them, the closer to the center, and I seem to have the most success that way. Also, when you are setting up your tray, you want to make sure you have similar heighted plants next to each other. So for example, I don't want to have tomatoes necessarily on both sides, because when they sprout, the tomatoes are going to get tall really quick. Meanwhile, my peppers are going to stay small for a fairly large amount of time. So you don't want them crowding out and taking up all of your sunlight or your light from your grow lamp. So you want to make sure you kind of have your group of peppers together, and then your tomatoes kind of bunched in one end, so that they're kind of equally competing with each other, and you don't have to shift them around quite as much. So I said you're going to leave these in a sunny spot, leave them alone, have them plugged in. You could have it on a timer, the 12 hours on, 12 hours off, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. I tend to just leave it on so everything sprouts really quickly. If you are working with some of these types of seed packs where it actually lists, so it sprouts in 7 to 15 days, that's saying it's at an average soil temperature of about 70 degrees, 65 to 70 degrees. So the warmer the soil, the faster it sprouts. So that's why those heat mats are perfect and exactly what you need. So most things you will start to see growing in 7 days. If you're starting anything like parsley, make sure you take a note that some things take almost 3 weeks to sprout. If you did get some of the nasturtiums, there are some things that say you do please soak those seeds for 24 hours beforehand. I believe the sweet peas say that as well. So just make sure you read the full packet before you start planting, in case you need to soak the seeds, just because they are so much bigger. So then you are much more successful. Now, I said you always want to keep these on. You don't want to take it off. If you see a lot of moisture, what I tend to do is just kind of tap it, just so that I can see if I have any seedling babies growing. You always want to keep them covered fully while things are still sprouting. So what I also have is a taller dome. So like I said, those tomatoes are going to sprout nice, quick, and easy. Other things might take a lot longer. So then I have space to keep my humidity dome on and accommodate for those taller tomatoes. The nice thing about this one is that it actually has a little vent to it. So for instance, once things have sprouted and they're starting to grow, you will have to actively water those. Again, it's best if you soak from the bottom, but as they get a little bit bigger, you could start to lightly spray them on the top. So there'll be a lot more moisture, so you may want to start venting these so that it allows some extra moisture, so those seedlings that haven't sprouted yet don't get too damp, and then you have risk of those seeds rotting. So a tall dome is another must-have in my household. Once your seedlings have finally sprouted and they have a set of true leaves, so you'll notice that your seedlings will pop up and they will have a leaf that looks nothing like what your actual product will look like. After those first leaves have gone up, you'll notice that again, the second set of leaves will be your first set of true leaves. And you'll notice that your tomato plants now look like tomato plants. Your pepper plant now looks like a pepper plant. So don't be nervous if you notice that your seedlings don't look like what you expect. You will want to transplant into a larger container. Say for instance, you have something small like this, and then you have flowers or things like that that you just want to grow for a little while more. That's when you can go to these bigger ones, or they have even bigger containers. For tomatoes, I like to go straight to red solo cups, because then that way I don't have to transplant them more. I'm able to plant the stem really deeply, and the roots grow out of the stem for tomatoes. They're really nice and easy that way. For all of your other plants, you want to directly transplant the same level of where they were sprouted. So you don't want to plant the stem anymore. You don't want to have any roots exposed. Just keep it just right. Tomatoes, like I said, you can't kill tomatoes. It's really hard. So you're going to transplant them to a larger container that you are going to use potting soil for. The thing is that your seed starting mix is great. It's light, it's fluffy, it's sterile. It, however, does not have any nutrients that are going to help your seedlings grow. So as soon as they have those first set of true leaves and they're looking nice, you're going to, again, that's my peppers, you're going to hold them and then you're going to pop them out, squeeze it out. I find it a little better if they're dry. Don't water your seedlings before you transplant. When they're a little bit drier, they're much easier just to pop out and move into a larger container. Use your potting soil, and then, you know, obviously keeping your lights. If you are just using a window, you will have to rotate your tray every day because otherwise it's going to be leaning one way or the other. If you notice your things are getting very thin, it's called getting leggy. Growing really tall really fast isn't necessarily very good. You want the light to be really bright on them. So if you do have a grow light, I have one at home that's got this big stand and actually lowers with a cord. You want to actually have the light, if you have a grow light, really close. You want it only a couple inches away from the leaves. So that's where, you know, it gets a little bit difficult with this, and that's kind of where it's nice to have these small ones so the things that are still starting can stay with the lower humidity dome, and those that are getting taller can have the high one, so that you have your grow light as close as you can. And then always daily rotate those seeds so that they kind of even out eventually from growing one side to the other. Now, when you transplant them outside, first you have to do something called hardening off. So that means you have them growing this beautiful, perfect humidity dome. What I like to do when my seedlings are growing, I actually pet them. So I just rub my hand over them. And what this does is that it strengthens the stems so that they grow, so they'll become stockier and they will be able to deal with the air a little bit better. They won't break when you're touching them. So I pet them a couple of times a day, weird like that, especially if it's a tomato, you're like, it smells like tomato. But what you can also do is you can have a fan on them on very low at the start for just a few minutes to get them used to it. Otherwise, if you put them outside in the direct sun and it's windy, you have just killed your seedlings. So what you could do on a nice warm day, you could set out the tray in a sheltered location where it's not too windy, some filtered light so they get used to it. For me, I have a fan going on for 20 minutes and then it'll kind of, you know, I'll do that a couple of times a day as it gets, you know, further along in the 2 weeks. So then that way they're used to the winds blowing. They won't dry out too quickly. They'll get used to that light. And then after those 2 weeks, you can transplant them out and you should be okay. So long as it says after frost has passed and it's at least past mid-May. A lot of folks, you know, bank on Memorial Day weekend to actually plant outside. Certain things like lettuces and kale and cabbages, peas, spinach, things like that. All of those can go. You'll notice that some of them might actually say, especially like your peas, can be planted as soon as the soil can be worked. I know I have raised beds and I've just turned all of my soil the other day. So I planted a few spinaches and things like that. So they're already out in the garden and they don't need to necessarily be started this way. Those are cool weather crops versus the peppers, tomatoes, squashes, which are warm weather crops that need to be past the fear of frost. So you've started your seeds, you know what you need. You need your tray so you don't drip everywhere. You need your seed starting trays, soil. You need your humidity domes. And you need your heat mats, labels, or anything you can stick in like that. What I'll also do is just put a piece of tape and write it. And you'll be all set. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email us or make a comment on this video, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Enjoy your seeds and happy gardening.